Hello, welcome to the Myth-Busting Neurodiverse Relationships podcast. I'm Natalie Roberts and I'm here with my co-host, Heather Parks. We've both been in our neurodiverse relationships and families for more than 25 years. We met 10 years ago when we were feeling really desperate and trying to solve a lot of issues in our relationship and our families. We've been journeying since then. We've found many more positive and hopeful ways to solve, resolve, repair, reconnect in those relationships and in our families, in our lives. And we now co-host also Loving Difference online, giving hope and a way forward for neurodiverse relationships. In this podcast, though, we're busting the myths about neurodiverse relationships, which we had when we started this journey, that we've realised aren't true, and that actually were preventing us from recovering and having the relationships with our partners and children that we wanted. So we want to dispel these myths and bring you hope that absolutely things can change. So whether you're out and about or comfy with a cuppa, let's dive into our next conversation. See you there.
Welcome to the Myth-Busting Neurodiverse Relationship podcast. If you've listened before, feel free to skip the intros. And if you're new to the podcast, a very warm welcome. If you like what you hear, please follow and subscribe to be notified of new episodes. I'm Heather Parks. I've been in a neurodiverse relationship with my husband, Phil, for 25 years, and we have 4 children. All of us have had struggles and challenges, particularly when neurodiversity was unknown to us. I discovered new ways of navigating difference so that I can be true to myself and thrive in my neurodiverse family. I'm now an accredited somatic coach and nervous system educator, helping others to heal so that they can be the best version of themselves and thrive too.
Hi, I'm Natalie Roberts. I've been in a neurodiverse relationship and family with my husband Pete for 25 years. We discovered neurodiversity was a part of our story in 2014 when we were really struggling as a couple and family. Now we're thriving and enjoying life in ways that I couldn't have imagined back then. I'm also an accredited relationship coach supporting individuals and couples in neurodiverse relationships to reverse the impact of unknown neurodiversity and thrive in a relationship and life that they dream of.
Since we met 9 years ago, we've reversed the impact of unknown neurodiversity and found new ways to resolve complex, everyday relationship and family challenges without our partners involved. We want you to know that you can change your whole experience by focusing on yourself and without needing to change anyone else. We also realise that this journey is about so much more than new or more knowledge.
In 2020, we created Loving Difference, the kind of online community that we'd have loved to have found when we were new to it all and struggling. Together, we now also host an online program with a map, empowering resources, tools, and all the support you need to recover yourself, create sustainable change, and be you in your relationship and your life. Loving Difference and the program that we host there are for everyone, whatever your neuro identity. What we all have in common is wanting new ways to thrive in our neurodiverse relationships. You can find out more at www.lovingdifference.net. In this podcast, we're busting myths about neurodiverse relationships that we had when we started the journey, that we've since realised aren't true, and they were preventing us from recovering and having the relationships with partners and children that we wanted. So we want to dispel these myths and bring you hope that absolutely things can change. And in today's episode, we're busting the myth that others need to change so that our experience is different. So whether you're out and about or comfy with a cuppa, let's dive into our next conversation.
Thanks for that. So we've had some questions, haven't we? And some curiosity from members being a bit unsure about this business, about not making other people change, and sort of questioning about, whether they've got the agency to change or what we really mean by that. And so I think we needed to have a little think about that and just come back and sort of hope we can explain or get a bit more clear for our listeners, didn't we?
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. I think that we used to think that our experience was dependent on what others did or didn't do. That was really fundamental, I think, to how we thought relationships with anyone worked, is that what I feel and I'm experiencing about what's going on was down to what others were doing or weren't doing. And we just realized that not true. So our waiting on others to change, or hoping that they'll change, or expecting or believing that they should change, I just think cost us our health and our happiness for years.
And more than that, it was quite damaging as well, because pushing other people to change or to be different, we only need to reverse that, don't we? And we realize that actually when someone puts that pressure on ourselves, it doesn't feel very fun on the other side of that, does it? So that's the thing, isn't it? Nobody really likes to be pushed to change. And
I also remember there being a lot of requests. I mean, if I look back, I realized there were a lot of requests and a lot of demands, a lot of expectations going in both directions for the other one of us to change or be different or do something differently. I definitely had a view. I felt like I was doing more of the changing and meeting these expectations as Pete than he was. I think he probably thought the same, and you're still not doing enough in order that we would have the experiences that we're each wanting. So if you were in this set of things and doing this, then I would feel this. And he was thinking, well, if you would be this and do this, then I would experience this. So that was the dynamic, I think. A lot of that was going on, and I definitely felt like I was doing a lot of changing.
Yeah, and I think that's a lot of the hope, isn't it? So we often talk about, the challenges that relationships have when there's unknown neurodiversity. And then the hope is that when we know about the neurodiversity, we'll go, oh, now we know what's going on. Now we know, that either that there needs to be some change, and we have expectations that someone else can learn to behave or be different, don't we? Once they know, we realize that that's really not going to be very healthy or helpful. And it didn't take into account anything around what someone's capacity was like, what their past experience is like. It didn't bring in all the other things that we know are really important factors, in addition to neurodiversity, don't we? So lots
also
of
I also think it's important to make the point that this isn't a neurodiversity specific issue or idea either, that in many relationships, regardless of whether there's a neurodiversity, a lot of relationships break down because we're not finding the way to meet in the middle, or this person's not being who I need them to be, or you're not doing what I need you to do, and I've explained many times what that is and you're still not doing it, or I've explained that these things are not acceptable and you're still doing them. And that dynamic is not specific or exclusive to neurodiverse relationships.
No. It's something around kind of this expectation around relationships and about other people meeting our needs, which we talk a lot about, don't we, in our program, and also about kind of this idea that someone is going to, if we've got a preference or a belief around something, that the other person should change or bend or flex and meet that. So we talk about boundaries, don't we? So for example, our listeners and members can get really confused, and I think I was so confused about boundaries. Can get really confusing because you think, you forget that both people have this line. So we kind of think of a boundary as like, I'm going to say that this is where I stand. I don't have a line, one line, I'm not going to let this isn't not going to cross this line. So I'm going to say that this is unacceptable behavior and you must do something different. And
I'll feel something different when you've done that.
They've, it's not, they've chosen not to do that, and they say they're choosing something over you, and so you make a whole story about that. And what we forget is that other people have a line and needs and preferences that they're also wanting, and so we have this kind of like middle ground that's actually quite tricky. And the skill of being in relationship is actually to kind of navigate this messy middle, isn't it?
That's what we call it. Yeah. How do we relate to one another? How do we be steady and know we talk about knowing our needs, preferences, tolerances, limits, aspirations, values. Having clarity about those enables us to be in this messy middle and be able to, communicate about that, relate to one another about that, so that we can figure out the degree to which we can meet or not, or adapt to or not, or want to or choose to or not, those various things that maybe we're thinking are needed. And that is definitely a messy place
It is messy,
be.
and it's also empowering, because what we're trying to help people see is that actually when we
choice,
we're in choice, we are creating choice, and we've got to remember that the other person's also in choice, so we can we're really giving each other a lot of information that we often think they should innately know, but actually neither of you do. So that's not also nothing to do with neuroidentity. We all think that everyone should read our minds, and actually none of us are very good at it. So by getting very clear and communicating about all of these needs and preferences and tolerances, as you just said, we can get we're giving information, and that's really then up to the other person to decide what they do with that information, and that's I think a much more helpful way of thinking about these things. So it's not ultimatums, it's not you must do this, or I'm drawing a line in the sand. We've got all this language around boundaries, haven't we? It's really challenging.
So we offer some new language, some new ways to think about it, some new ways to relate to that, some new ways to live into that, that are healthier, healthier for us primarily, healthier, and then create a much healthier dynamic, a healthier relationship dynamic than we've been in, that doesn't then rely on demanding, expecting, pushing, forcing, and on the other side, if you're overly accommodating, changing, doing things that are not aligned with who you are or what you value, like all these kinds of things, that we are in choice. There can be yes and no. Do you want to share? So about some really everyday situations that you were noticing from this question that had come in from someone, and sort of that idea of someone, one or both people need to be changing, so we can't possibly have a one person working on it, or one person changing, the other person has to change. But you were describing how what they were saying, even you've been encountering that just lately at home in some everyday situations.
So we're able to stay in a much steadier, sort of healthy relationship dynamic, and that enables us to communicate with more clarity about kind of what our preferences are and what our needs are. And so, I mean, I remember the really typical ones. I mean, before I had these skills, the typical ones were like, why can't I just have a hug? But I keep saying, when I'm upset, I need a hug, or when I've got a migraine and I'm in bed, I want someone to come and to look after me. And it took a lot of unpicking of that kind of situation to realize that we both responded to being ill or to being upset very, very differently, and what we needed and wanted in that situation was completely different. So those things really need searching out, don't they, and understanding about why we tend to do what we think we want rather than necessarily being able to, even when you don't have the capacity or the
or you don't want, somebody doesn't want to do what you're needing in that way.
Like I might do it wrong, or it's loads of things like that. And I think there is lots of people who are kind of doing the work and think they've got the greater self-awareness can have so many blind spots. I mean, I was just like really recently, like, got some insights from Phil on what's it like on the other side of the equation. And
what have you got to change?
We've got several of us in there's parcels arriving here like so often. We're like real internet shoppers, and a lot of it goes back. My daughter tries things on and it doesn't work, and he was able to express like how much anxiety that actually causes, and his preference would be that we do not internet shop. So that that is kind of new information, or I previously he'd been quite reactive, but I didn't really understand what it was that was creating all that anxiety. But it really is actually uncomfortable for him to come home and find parcels at the door. So with that information, I've now got to choose what I do about that. So I ban everyone from internet shopping? Probably where I live, it's not very feasible. Do I at least make sure that there's not like so many parcels around the front door that when he comes in from a stressful day at work, he's tripping over them and is immediately, that might be a sensible solution that I do. Do I, and there's being careful about what reassurance or what evidence can I provide that actually shows that I am quite careful about tracking returns? Because that was one anxiety, that we're not really getting our money back from all these returns. Do we really know that it gets returned and the money come back? So there's a trust thing going on.
You were getting a lot more clarity about what
absolutely.
the needs or what was
what
troubling,
the
or
was,
what, rather than would you just stop this or change that? You had more information, and then you could stay in choice yourself. I'm hearing you make some, or just work through it and decide, well, what's the possible solutions?
What
but
can
also,
I do?
what could I do? What can I do? What do I want to do? Not just assume that you'll have to just do
because I think if you know, actually the reality is it would like me to just stop using that way of ordering things, and that feels not really feasible for me. So, but I am also wanting to honor the needs and preferences of somebody else, because I have the capacity and ability to kind of think that through and figure out some ways that make it less bad. And there was a few other things that came up around that. For example, I know we've got a dog, and there seems to be, you know, no matter how many times I clear up the dog toys, they sort of all fall out. And I was just thinking, he was just like expressing how frustrated it you know, and irritated that made him feel, just having dog toys everywhere. And I did think, actually, they can take, you know, it's simple, isn't it? Because I'm not going to get rid of all the dog toys, because that's what I'm hearing. He's like, doesn't understand why the dog has to have toys. Actually, could we just get rid of all the toys, because we just got too much stuff in the house? And I'm hearing that, and you know, perhaps it's that I decide now with that information that I want to rationalize some of them, or maybe it's, I also think that the container I've got them in, they tend to spill out. Maybe I need to put them in something that's, or maybe find some more cupboard space so it's not so obvious, or whatever it is. I'm now in choice about how I could choose to meet that need, or you know, decide that it's not something I can compromise on. Whereas we don't really talk about it in terms of compromising, do we? Because all of those things, they wouldn't really be a compromise for me. None of those things would actually change anything about the way I'm living or doing. They're not big things, but they would make a difference.
I don't think it's compromised so much, and we tend not to use that. You know,
we don't.
We have quite radical different approaches than compromise. We don't really use compromise. That might be also something unusual for people to hear, that's we have different. Again, it's not that we don't do anything, but we don't use that particular strategy. We use some other ones. And yeah, so you were remaining in choice and deciding on something that he's saying is unacceptable, not okay. So again, his boundary or his need preference that he's expressing would be a certain thing, and then you're able to come back to your own choices and your own needs, preferences, etc. about that thing, and then work out kind of where your line is, and be able to then work out, well, what I always talk about, like, in that messy middle, is then like a third way. It's not that we're going to get over to here or it's like, and people talk about compromise as well, then everyone has to give up something. Whereas we like to talk about, well, what I wonder what the situation is beyond that, where some level or as much level as possible of everyone's needs, preferences, tolerances are met, and we move forward in that direction. I mean, I think if you're in a situation where you're not having any of these discussions, then navigating that messy middle is even more messy. I think that is the reality of that.
It takes a long time to be able to get steady enough, doesn't it? Because we're very reactive. We tend to get very defensive. So and so does the other person, and that triggers even more in you. So we really need to work on getting into a much healthier relationship mode, as we refer to it, so that we can be steadier in having these conversations in the first place. And that takes a lot of capacity. So there's all these other things that needs to be brought in before we can kind of get into this situation where we're really relating in a really healthy way and having some of these difficult conversations.
Yeah, it's huge. I do think it's really big. And I think when I made decision to stop forcing, because I realized I was doing a lot of that in relatively quite subtle ways. I wouldn't have said I was somebody who forced people to do things. I didn't think I controlled or manipulated people. Like, those were not things that I thought I was using strategies for. But on reflection, when I was actually honest with myself and looked at how I was handling situations and family members and people and situations, there was very subtle strategies of control and force and push that I just don't think were helpful to the connection that I was having with those people. I don't think it was supportive of them expressing or living into more of who they are individually, and that's something we're really passionate about. It didn't enable me to really find out what would be aligned for them, and then work out how do we figure out the answer for all of that. I think that was huge, really, to start, well, to just not to focus on myself. That's kind of where we come back to then, isn't it, for now, is that we focus on ourselves, and it doesn't mean that we stop having it. We change expectations into needs and preferences. There's things change. We're not like suppressing or stuffing stuff down or ignoring things. It's actually getting more clarity about all of these.
I was going to say, it's a lot about clarity, and also about capacity, and also about reducing our reactivity, isn't it? So so many things. Actually, we've got 20 landmarks, because so they all feed into each other, don't they, in our program, and they're all really useful.
I think it's really important to notice or recognize how this needing someone to change goes in both directions. I think that's really helpful, and I think it's certainly across all neuroidentities that kind of dynamics going on in the relationship, and that when we shift the focus to ourselves and changing our experiencing without needing to change anyone else, it isn't then either that person doesn't change at all. In our experience, the person does change. They may change for the better, they may change for what we might think was not the better, or there might be a mixture of the two, which is, I would say, is what I experienced as we moved in it. At some points it felt like very difficult, and other points it was like, oh my gosh, I'm not sure how did that happen. It was
because I think when we reduce demands and expectation onto someone else, it automatically takes the pressure off and allows them to have more sort of capacity for some of the other communications, and that sometimes it just changed things, didn't it? There's like
and I also think
as well, we got happier as well, we got better at meeting our own needs, so we were actually like nicer human beings as well. I think that was very key in my household. I mean, not just with my partner, but in fact that was very true with my children, when you were just like noticing that everyone was kind of discombobulating on a regular basis. You do think, actually there's a bit of a common denominator there.
And I also think that if we're talking about allowing people to be who they are, and figuring out how we will handle in a healthier way for ourselves, that person being who they are right now, whatever that is. The truth is that is because that's the truth for us too. Is that the invitation that we have, and the encouragement and the passion we have, is for you to be all of you, more of you, rediscover that, remember that, and be more of you as who you are. and that your partner also will be in that process, which they may or may not like, what's happening with that. But as you focus on yourself, I think that's the key also, is that we're saying be you, be yourself, express that, get clearer about that, and have healthier ways to align yourself and your decisions and your choices and your life with who you are. Because often many of us wandered so far from who that is, that's the invitation, is be that person, and then work out how you relate to your partner or your children and other people from that version of yourself. It's just a totally different way to approach the whole thing. Yeah, great. Okay,
should we leave it there? What do we think?
Let's leave it there. And so I guess, the truth then, with all that in mind, then the truth I guess we've realized again is that you can change your whole experience, your experience, by focusing on yourself, and without needing to change anyone else. As we've said, that doesn't mean change won't happen, but you're not the one forcing or making the changes happen.
No, let go of that role. That's our encouragement. Let go of that.
Yeah.
So If this episode has resonated with you, subscribe to the podcast wherever you're listening or watching to get notifications of future episodes. To dive deeper into all of this with professional coaching, resources, and all the support you need, join us in Love Indifference via www.loveindifference.net. And we'll be back here soon.